What if I told you that luck is not something you chase, but something you become? Not a rare accident, not a random blessing, not something reserved for a few chosen people, but a natural expression of your inner state. Right now, your life is not responding to your effort as much as it is responding to your assumption of yourself. And the moment you begin to see yourself as the luckiest person alive, something subtle begins to shift. You stop expecting things to go wrong. You stop preparing for disappointment. You stop living in hesitation. Instead, you begin to move differently, calmly, confidently, naturally, because deep inside, you already know everything always works out for you. And once that becomes your inner truth, life has no choice but to reflect it back. There is a quiet force shaping every moment of your life, yet most people never recognize it. It is not luck, it is not coincidence, it is not even effort alone. It is something far more subtle, far more consistent, and far more powerful. Your assumption, what you assume to be true about yourself, and your life becomes the invisible foundation upon which your entire reality is built. Not what you hope for, not what you wish for, but what you accept as true within yourself without needing proof. Every experience you are living right now is a reflection of a past assumption that once felt normal to you. At some point, you assumed certain beliefs about life, about people, about your own worth, and those assumptions quietly shaped your decisions, your reactions, and your expectations. Over time, those inner beliefs hardened into outer experiences. And now, what you see around you feels like reality, but it is actually just an echo of what you once accepted within. This is why change rarely happens through action alone. You can try harder, work longer, and push more, but if the underlying assumption remains the same, the results tend to repeat. Because action without identity shift is only surface level movement. It is like painting over a wall without changing the structure beneath it. Assumption works differently. It does not ask for permission. It does not wait for evidence. It simply declares within you what is true, and then life reorganizes itself around that declaration. If you assume lack, you begin to notice limitations everywhere. If you assume difficulty, obstacles seem to multiply. If you assume rejection, you interpret neutral situations as denial. Not because the world changed, but because your lens changed. And the same is true in the opposite direction. When you assume success, you begin to move differently. When you assume love, you stop chasing validation. When you assume things always work out for you, even delays start to feel meaningful instead of threatening. The outer world has not changed yet, but your interpretation of it has. And that interpretation is the beginning of transformation. This is why assumption is so powerful. It bypasses the need for external confirmation. It allows you to live from the end result before it physically appears. You no longer wait for life to prove something to you. Instead, you embody the version of yourself for whom it is already proven. But there is a challenge most people face. The senses always try to contradict the assumption. What you see, hear, and experience may not immediately align with what you are choosing to believe within. And this is where many give up. They let the outer world override the inner decision, yet the deeper truth is simple. The outer world is always delayed, it is always catching up. It is never the origin, it is only the reflection. So if you remain loyal to your assumption, even in the absence of evidence, you begin to shift the direction of your reality. Not instantly, not always dramatically, but consistently and inevitably. You do not need to force belief. You simply need to persist in what you have chosen to assume. You return to it when doubt appears. You reconnect with it when circumstances challenge it. You live from it until it feels natural. Because once an assumption feels natural, it no longer feels like something you are trying to achieve. It feels like truth. And when something becomes your inner truth, life has no choice but to mirror it outwardly. So the real question is not, what do you want? The real question is, what are you assuming to be true about yourself right now? Because that quiet assumption, more than anything else, is defining your reality. Most people believe their life is shaped by what they do. They think if they work harder, try longer, and push through enough obstacles, their reality will eventually change. But there is a deeper layer operating beneath every action, every decision, and every outcome. And that layer is identity. Identity is the silent agreement you hold about who you are. It is not what you say out loud. It is not what you post or pretend. It is what you consistently accept as true about yourself in the privacy of your own mind. And this unseen identity becomes the filter through which every experience is formed. If you see yourself as someone who struggles, then life will seem like a series of struggles. If you see yourself as someone who is always almost there but not yet, then your experiences will reflect delay and incompletion. If you see yourself as someone who is not naturally lucky, then even neutral events will be interpreted through that lens. Not because life is fixed, but because identity is directing interpretation. This is why two people can live through the same situation and experience completely different realities. One sees opportunity, the other sees obstacle. One feels calm, the other feels stress. One expects things to work out, the other prepares for things to fail. The external event is identical, but the identity is different. And that difference changes everything. Your identity does not just influence how you feel, it determines how you respond, what you notice, what you ignore, and what you believe is possible for you. Over time, these small internal choices accumulate into what you call your life. But here is what most people miss. Identity is not fixed. It is not something you are born with and forced to carry forever. It is something you have been repeating. Every thought you accept, every label you agree with, every story you tell yourself strengthens a particular version of you. And the more you repeat it, the more natural it feels. But what feels natural is not always what is true. It is simply what is familiar. This is where transformation becomes possible. Because if identity was formed through repetition, it can also be reshaped through repetition, not by force but by choice. You can begin to ask yourself a simple but powerful question. Who am I being right now? Not who you want to become in the future, but who you are embodying in this moment. Are you the version of yourself who is still waiting for things to change? Or are you the version of yourself for whom things have already shifted? These are not abstract ideas, they are lived states, and every state carries its own perception of reality. When you identify as someone who already has what they desire, something subtle changes in your energy. You stop reacting from lack. You stop interpreting life through absence. You stop seeking external validation to feel complete. Instead, there is a quiet internal alignment, as if something within you has already settled. And from that settled state, your decisions become different. You no longer choose from fear or urgency. You choose from calm certainty. You no longer chase outcomes. You allow them. You no longer try to become worthy. You recognize that worth was never missing. But the shift does not happen in a single moment. It happens through consistency of identity. You return to it again and again, even when the outer world contradicts it, even when doubt appears, even when old patterns try to pull you back. Because identity is not proven by what you see, it is strengthened by what you persist in being. Over time, something powerful occurs. What once felt like imagination begins to feel like memory. The version of you who already has it does not feel distant anymore. It feels familiar, natural, real. And when that happens, experience must follow. So the real work is not forcing change in the outer world. It is choosing the inner identity that naturally produces the outer world you desire. Because once identity shifts, experience has no choice but to follow. There is a simple truth that explains almost every experience in your life, yet it is often the last thing people are willing to accept. The world you see, the situations you face, the people you meet, and the patterns you repeat are not happening randomly. They are not separate from you. They are a reflection of something deeper. Your inner state, what you consistently hold within, your dominant feelings, assumptions, and identity, eventually becomes visible around you. The outer world is not creating your reality, it is revealing it. Most people try to change their life by focusing only on the outside. They want better circumstances, better relationships, better opportunities. So they adjust their actions, change their routines, and try to force new outcomes. But if the inner state remains the same, the outer experience eventually returns to familiar patterns. It may shift temporarily, but it does not truly transform. This is because the outer world is always responding to what is stable within you, not what is temporary. Your inner state is like a frequency. It is the emotional and mental atmosphere you occupy most of the time. And just like a signal, it attracts, organizes, and filters your external reality to match it. If the inner state is rooted in doubt, life reflects uncertainty. If it is rooted in fear, life reflects limitation. If it is rooted in confidence and certainty, life begins to reflect support and alignment. This is not punishment or reward. It is simply correspondence. And because most people are not aware of their inner state, they react to the outer world as if it is the cause rather than the result. They see delay and assume failure. They see absence and assume lack. They see contradiction and assume impossibility. But in doing so, they strengthen the very state that created those conditions in the first place. The shift happens when you begin to observe rather than react. Instead of letting the outer world define your inner state, you begin to deliberately choose your inner state regardless of what appears outside. You decide to feel aligned even when circumstances feel delayed. You decide to feel certain even when evidence is missing. You decide to feel complete even when things are still unfolding. This is not denial, it is direction, because the outer world is always slightly behind. It is a delayed reflection of what has already been accepted within you. So if you wait for the outer world to change before you change internally, you will always be following behind your own life. But when you change the inner state first, you become the source of change rather than the observer of it. At first, this requires awareness. You begin to notice your reactions. You notice when you slip into doubt. You notice when you start reacting to appearances. And instead of staying there, you gently return inward to the state you have chosen. Over time, this becomes natural. The inner state becomes more stable than the outer noise. And when that happens, something powerful shifts. The outer world begins to lose its authority over you. It no longer dictates your mood, your decisions, or your sense of possibility. Instead, you begin to live from within outward. And as that inner consistency strengthens, the outer reflection starts to adjust. Not always instantly, not always dramatically, but inevitably. Because the outer world cannot maintain a different pattern from the one that is consistently held within. So the real transformation is not about fixing the outside. It is about stabilizing the inside, because once your inner state becomes steady, clear, and aligned with what you desire, the outer world has no choice but to mirror it back to you. There comes a stage in every transformation where everything looks unchanged. You have set your intention, you have imagined the outcome, you have felt it as real within yourself, and yet the outer world remains the same. No obvious shift, no visible movement, no immediate confirmation. And this is the exact point where most people unknowingly give up. Not because nothing is happening, but because they stop persisting when doubt begins to speak louder than their inner knowing. But doubt is not a sign of failure. It is simply resistance from an old identity that has not yet dissolved. Persistence is what separates momentary imagination from lived reality. It is not about forcing belief or constantly repeating affirmations out of anxiety. It is something quieter, deeper, and far more powerful. It is the decision to remain faithful to your inner state even when your senses argue otherwise. It is choosing the unseen over the seen again and again until the unseen becomes visible. Most people misunderstand persistence. They think it means trying harder or pushing more intensely. But true persistence is not strain, it is return. It is the gentle act of coming back to your chosen assumption every time you drift away from it. You drift into doubt and you return. You drift into waiting and you return. You drift into reacting and you return again to the state of already having it. This return is the turning point because the mind will always offer alternatives. It will show you reasons why it hasn't happened yet. It will point to lack, delay, and contradiction. And if you accept those interpretations, you shift states without realizing it. You move back into the identity of the one who is waiting instead of the one who already has. But when you persist beyond doubt, something subtle begins to change within you. The old reactions lose strength. The external world begins to lose its emotional grip. You no longer feel the need to analyze every detail or interpret every delay. Instead, you begin to rest in a quiet certainty that does not depend on evidence. At first, this may feel like effort. You are consciously choosing your state. You are reminding yourself of what is true beyond appearances. But over time, repetition builds stability. What once required effort begins to feel natural, and what feels natural becomes dominant. This is the hidden threshold most people never cross. They reach the point of doubt and assume it means nothing is working. But in truth, doubt often appears right before alignment stabilizes. It is the final resistance of an old pattern dissolving. If you stop there, you return to the beginning. But if you persist, something irreversible begins. You stop needing reassurance. You stop looking for signs. You stop measuring progress through external change. Instead, your focus shifts inward, where the real work is happening. You continue to occupy the state of fulfillment, even when nothing around you confirms it yet. And slowly, without force, the outer world begins to adjust. Situations shift in ways you did not plan. People respond differently. Opportunities appear that were not visible before. Not because you chased them, but because your inner state became stable enough to allow them. Persistence is what holds the bridge between inner assumption and outer manifestation. Without it, the bridge collapses. With it, the bridge becomes inevitable. So when doubt appears, do not interpret it as truth. Do not treat it as a warning. Treat it as a moment of choice. Will you return to the old state of waiting or remain in the new state of having? Because every time you return, you strengthen the new identity. Every time you persist beyond doubt, you anchor it deeper. And eventually, the state you once had to consciously choose becomes the only state you naturally inhabit. And at that point, manifestation is no longer something you are waiting for. It is something you are living from. There is a point in every true inner transformation where effort must stop being the engine, where trying, forcing, and constantly checking for results can no longer take you further. And in that stillness, something deeper is revealed. The final key is not action, not repetition, not even visualization alone. It is the feeling of already having it. This is the state where desire stops feeling like something ahead of you and starts feeling like something within you, not in imagination alone, but in identity, in tone, in emotional certainty. It is the quiet shift where you no longer reach for what you want, because internally you have already accepted it as yours. Most people live in the opposite state. They want something, so they feel its absence. They think about it, and that thinking reinforces distance. They visualize it, but the underlying emotion is still not yet. And that subtle feeling of not yet becomes the dominant signal they send into their experience. No matter how much effort is applied, that inner sense of lack continues to shape the outer reflection. But when the feeling changes, everything begins to shift. To feel as if it is already done is not denial of reality. It is the creation of a new inner certainty that does not depend on external proof. It is a calm, grounded, emotional state that says, without words, this is already mine. And when that feeling becomes stable, it stops being a technique and becomes a way of being. At first, this feeling may be subtle. It may not come with intensity or excitement. In fact, it often feels surprisingly simple, a quiet peace, a gentle certainty, a sense that nothing is missing. And this simplicity is exactly what makes it powerful, because true creation does not require emotional force. It requires emotional alignment. When you truly feel it is already done, you stop negotiating with life. You stop asking when it will happen. You stop looking for confirmation in every moment. Instead, you begin to carry yourself as someone for whom the outcome is already settled. And this shift changes everything internally. Your thoughts become less desperate and more confident. Your attention moves away from lack and settles into completion. Your reactions soften because you are no longer interpreting life through absence. Even your silence changes. It becomes calm, grounded, certain. This is what it means to live from fulfillment rather than toward it. But maintaining this feeling requires something important: consistency without dependence on the outer world, because the outer world will not immediately reflect this inner shift. In fact, for a time, it may look completely unchanged. And this is where many people lose the state. They let appearances override feeling. Yet appearances are always delayed echoes. They are never the starting point. So the practice is simple but not always easy. Return to the feeling again and again, not through force, but through remembrance. Whenever doubt appears, you return. Whenever waiting creeps in, you return. Whenever you start checking reality for proof, you return once more to the feeling that it is already done. Over time, this repetition does something powerful. The feeling becomes natural, and what becomes natural becomes dominant. And what becomes dominant becomes your lived experience. At that stage, you no longer need to convince yourself. You no longer need techniques. You no longer need reminders. You simply are the version of yourself for whom it is already complete. And from that state, life begins to respond differently. Not because you chased it harder, but because you finally aligned with it fully. So, this is the final key: not wanting it, not waiting for it, but feeling it as already yours, until there is no separation left between you and it. Because when the feeling is complete within, the outer world has no choice but to follow. So now you understand, Being the luckiest person alive is not about chance, timing, or external conditions. It is about identity. When you consistently assume that life is on your side, when you persist in the feeling that everything always aligns for you, when you stop reacting to appearances and start living from inner certainty, you change the source of your experience. And when the source changes, everything flows differently. You no longer chase outcomes, you attract them. You no longer force situations, you allow them. You no longer doubt life, you trust it. Because in your inner world, you are already the one for whom everything works out effortlessly. And that inner knowing becomes the foundation of your outer reality. So from this moment onward, do not wait for luck. Embark as luck, live as the one for whom everything always works in perfect timing. And watch how life begins to confirm what you already accepted within. If this message resonated with you, carry it with you, not as information, but as a way of being returned to it whenever doubt appears. Let it remind you of who you are choosing to be. And as you continue on this journey of inner transformation, stay open, because the more you embody this state, the more effortlessly life begins to respond. Thank you for being here.